Good evening and welcome to World Today. I'm Conrad Gorlinski. Well, France's social unrest is in its fourth day. The protests seem to be easing, but President Macron met today with parliamentary leaders and mayors of cities affected by the chaos. Violent reactions to the police shooting of 17-year-old Nahel M. have led to thousands of arrests and widespread destruction, with security forces deploying over 45,000 personnel. Here's our report.
The situation on the streets of Paris is slowly simmering down. Days of violent protests, filled with fires and fights, followed the death of a 17-year-old who was killed by a police officer. What followed were one of the country's wildest riots.
There are some videos calling for violence on social media, and many of them have called for people to take actions in big cities. Inevitably, these videos spread everywhere, and many people watched them.
Nearly 300 burned cars, over 30 damaged buildings, and 350 fires on public roads. Thousands of rioters were detained for their participation, and the first ones have already been handed suspended prison sentences. But the family of the 17-year-old calls for calm. Nahel was shot dead by a police officer at a traffic stop last week. This immediately sparked public outrage. His loved ones, however, accused the public of escalating the situation and using his death as a pretext for large-scale aggression and devastation on the streets of France.
The victim was a young boy. He's very kind. He's not evil. He's not a thug. What the media are saying about him is not true. His mom and grandmother raised him well.
The French president urges the need to discuss the matter further with both houses of parliament. Macron stated that this death and abuse of police power could trigger a historic change.
Well, joining us now to unpack what's happened here and possible steps forward are Emmanuel Dupuy, the president of the Institute for European Perspective and Security, and Professor David Engels, a historian from the Institute for Western Affairs in Poznań. Gentlemen, thanks very much for joining us this evening. Now, I wanted to start with you, Mr. Dupuy. Let's just start with how this started. Why this reaction? Well, I mean, it's obvious that the pressure had been building for quite some time, given the violent reaction to the shooting of this young man. So let's start with the beginning. And how did this happen, and why this terribly violent reaction?
Well, first of all, I will make a clear distinction between the necessity to understand what happened after the killing of the unjustified killing of young Nahel and the role of the policemen, the two policemen who have been convicted for this action, and the riots, which have nothing to do, on my point of view, or have very few things to do about this killing. I think I'm just paraphrasing what the grandmother of young Nahel said. The people are going on the streets, looting, destroying public goods, taking violent actions against local authorities. Two mayors have been arrested in the recent hours. Has nothing to do with the debate whether or not the police is acted in a justified way, whether or not there is racism inside the police. This is another debate, and I think the very dignified and very calm words of the grandmother a few hours ago said things very clearly, that the police was doing its job to reassess or reinforce the situation, but there has to be justice to be given. I must say that there has not been this level of violence for a long time. The last time we've experienced this level of violence was in 2005, therefore 18 years ago.
All right, and Mr. Engels, anything to add there?
Yeah, well, there are some points. So on the one hand, of course, there is let's say, a bit an ambiguous position of Nahel's family, because his mother, during the first days, called not only for collective sadness, but also for revolting. So there was obviously some form of ambivalence. What I noticed in these the events of the last days are three things. On the one hand, what shocked me is the self-solidarization of the French left with the rioters. That became quite obvious that, of course, there were some lukewarm condemnations, but in general, there has been, let's say, some form of cohesion between the looters of migration origin and, let's say, of more leftist anarchist origin. Not only in France, by the way, but also in Germany when speaking about the events in France. The second point is that, well, what shocked me so strongly is that these protests were not addressed only against symbols of power or of authority or of people of other social classes, but systematically against objects representing something that we could call Western civilization. There have been libraries that have been pillaged. There have been schools that have been destroyed. There have been normal family homes. There have been let's say, public buildings, public offices that have been destroyed. So things that are not explainable only because of social unrest or social disappointment, but that are symbols of our civilization to a certain point of view. And the third and last point I would like to stress, what shocked me so strongly, is a certain cold when it comes to supporting the police. We see that during these last years, the French police has played, let's say, a very ambiguous role. Think about the massive violence of the French police against the Yellow Vest, against the COVID demonstrators only some months ago, against those demonstrating against the lowering of the age of pensions. And that explains why the police is not anymore seen also by the political right and by the more conservative citizens as a symbol of the French state and of authority, but unfortunately gradually as a rather a partisan symbol of the system Macron. And that is something, of course, that is not a good sign when it comes to the future.
Yes, and we will talk about that. Yes, because they lost support on the right, and now they've lost support on the left. It's a very serious situation. But now I wanted to come back to Mr. Dupuy, and I wanted to ask you. I see a lot of parallels here between what happened, what is happening in France, and what happened just last year during Black Lives Matter in the United States. Is there something in people's minds? Are the problems in the U.S. finding their way, moving into Europe, even though those same problems don't really exist? Or do they exist? Is there some sort of ethnic and racial tension?
Yeah, of course, there's a racial tension, but I'm not sure this is what has fueled this resentment of the youngsters. I would argue the fact that there has been two agendas when it comes to the upcoming, the last hours. First of all, there has been a political consensus to reassess the necessity to re-engage a dialogue between the left and the right, between all of the political leadership, whether they are local authorities, whether they are national MPs, whether they come from civil society, to see where we are in a French society. Is the capacity to integrate a part of our population which is which is facing more difficulties to be integrated, whether they come from ethnic diversity, whether they do not come from the French, from the European continent, whether or not they have a different religion. I think this is a debate which everyone wants to have, and Emmanuel Macron, I think, reassessed this very clearly today, saying that this debate must be a political debate. And of course, it's not by destroying the symbols of the state that you reaffirm your will to integrate the state. Now, when it comes to the importation of a black bat, the question of what you raised in the beginning, I do not see it this way. First of all, because the situation is now more intensifying around the role of the police, the capacity of the police to assess or reassess the security order. 45,000 policemen have been deployed. There's now a debate whether or not the police should be only in a curative capacity, only in a offensive capacity, if I may say so, or whether or not we must have a debate about the role of the police inside our society. As it was mentioned by my colleague, there have been a lot of tensions during the last 2 years. Of course, the yellow vest, and the last tension is, of course, with the protests against the pensions reforms and the will of the French to not totally agree
That's right.
with the
And
government.
a lot of police were deployed against those protests. Why did it take so long for the police to be deployed against these particular protests?
Well, first of all, it got out of hand very surprisingly. Everyone thought that it would be some riots for some hours after the manifestation. As you now assess, we are entering the 7th night of these protests, 8 days of unrest. So there was a sort of surprise about the intensity of the violence. Second of all, I'm not sure that the police was not deployed very rapidly. It was deployed very rapidly inside Paris, where, again, the events were more or less eager to happen since the unfortunate death of Nahel happened in Nanterre, very close to Paris. But it got spread, and it spread it, in most of the cities. So I'm not sure that the police was not prepared. What is, of course, at stake is the fact that there's a sort of ambivalence or sort of schizophrenic vision of the police. The French want a police to be very proactive when it comes to assuming the security of the citizens when these liberties are undertaken by the riots. But of course, they protest against the unqualified or discutable use of the police when it comes to stop legitimate protests. Again, the reforms of the pension, of the yellow vest show this ambiguity of the French population in regards to its security forces.
That's right. All right. And Mr. Dupuy, Mr. Engels, do you have any comments?
Yeah, some remarks here and there. Well, on the one hand, of course, there is a fundamental difference in the profile of the rioters. On the one hand, you have this profile of young, mostly migrant, essentially Muslim people that are spread everywhere around the big metropolitan areas. And so for the police, of course, this is much more difficult to control, as it can basically spread everywhere, than a very localized profile like in the demonstrations that we had against COVID, that we had against the pension reform. So that is something very different. On the other hand, I found the question interesting concerning the influence of the US, because indeed there is an influence, but it is essentially a mental influence. These are young people that are confronted every day with also social media and information coming from everywhere, essentially, of course, from the US. And so they are fed from morning to evening with this idea that people of color, Muslims, people of other ethnical or civilizational group are somehow oppressed by evil white people. This is, as a rhetoric, this is spreading from the US to France, and it is taken over simply because it gives a shape, it gives a political program to a general feeling of resentment, of boredom, of social disqualification. And of course, this is also behind it. This explains also why these riots have spread elsewhere. Even in my own home country, Belgium, because I'm from Belgium, we see that these riots have been spread in Brussels. We had similar incidents during these last days. And of course, this has become an international issue. Think only about Erdogan, who just some hours ago said that in his view, there was an issue about institutional and systemic racism in France. So that shows, of course, the internationalization of this conflict, and it shows, of course, that people from Turkey who listen to Erdogan also get, of course, that kind of impression. So even though the situation, and I fully agree with my colleague, the situation in France is very different from the situation in the US, nevertheless, there's a mental amalgamation of all that a bit everywhere in Europe. And so
certainly,
this is, of course,
there's certainly an ideological. There's certainly an ideological element to this. And now my next question, I don't know which of you feel more comfortable answering it, but obviously there are a lot of groups just waiting for a moment like this to profit from this sort of situation, from this sort of division. Now, from what you're seeing, who's profiting? I'm sure there are elements on the left and elements on the right that are profiting from this situation. What have you noticed happening?
Well, if I can jump in this question, I think there's been, of course, a polarization amongst the extremists, extreme left and extreme right. But I would argue the fact that the extreme right and Marine Le Pen has been very cautious about the events. First of all, because they are leaning for respectability and they want to present a very, let's say, very good middle position. When Jean-Luc Mélenchon has fueled some of the riots, it was very clear yesterday when he made an interview saying that he did not, of course, cover the riots, but he understood the rioters and giving the impression that, in a way, he was sort of justifying the violence, the extreme violence against the public authorities, against the looting of the shops, etc., etc. I think there is a clear, maybe, question or answer to the first mention about Black Lives Matter and its importation. I think we are witnessing a clearer bipolarization of the policies in Europe and coming with extreme communitarism that is something which existed in other area, of course, namely United States or Anglo-Saxon states. This is quite a new perspective. In France, we used to look for consensus. We used to think that politics was more of an agglomeration or trying to build a consensus. Now we see political forces try to build a dissensus to have its own legitimacy. This is very clear with the extreme left and, of course, extreme right a bit less in France, elsewhere in Europe. To finish in a nutshell, I think what we're experiencing is a conservatization of the politics everywhere in Europe. As my colleague mentioned, not only in Belgium, not only in Germany, but in Switzerland as well. We have to assess the fact that in a few days in Spain, there will be a new majority in which the extreme right will be stronger because of the migration issue. And of course, Kyriakos Mitsotakis has won the elections in Greece based on the question of migration. So I see a clear polarization inside the European political game. And of course, this will be very clear during the European elections. If, for example, the Conservatives, the EPP, and the ERC manage to make a coalition.
All right, and Professor Engels, any final comments on that?
Perhaps just one remark. I think that the restraint of the right in France is, of course, on the one hand based on their wish of de-demonization and of presenting a serious front. But there's also another aspect, that is that France is not dominated anymore by a polarization of positions, but we have three camps. And that is an important explanation. We have, on the one hand, we have the political group that is represented by, you could say, simplifying, the migrants and the extreme left that work together in some form of Faustian pact, you can say, that is represented by people like Mélenchon. Then we have, of course, that is basically the France of the banlieue. Then we have, on the other side, we have the France that is France périphérique, people living outside of the big towns, that live in the provinces and that only find representation with people like Le Pen and Zemmour that are counted as right. But then we have also the France of the metropolitan areas and partly also the coastal areas. And this is the France of the Système Macron and the Système Hollande before. And this France has, of course, had the opportunity also through career options and through engagement policies to change the face of the police and of the military. And that explains why now the right, on the right side of the political spectrum, we have a form of desolidarization with the police, as the police is not seen anymore as an apolitical or supra-political element representing the entire state, but as an instrument of the Système Macron. That explains why the right, perhaps differently from what they would have done 10 years ago, has not started to explain its solidarity with the police, but has remained quite outside, as they see this in a certain way as a problem between the France des banlieues and the France métropolitaine, with the France périphérique being a bit in retreat and seeing how finally their two enemies are starting to fight each other.
Fascinating perspective. Mr. Dupuy, anything to comment on that?
Yes, well, I will not agree on everything that my colleague said, but there is an important issue, is that the Republican Pact, which has been shattered in France, cannot be just leaning on the police and the security apparatus. I mean, the government is playing a very tricky game, giving the impression that the only system of defense that we have are the police and the gendarmerie. This is not what they've been doing. This is not their job. Just to give you a clear picture on that, they've been under pressure for now 2 years without any form of unrest, of rest. There has been the yellow vest, there's been the COVID yellow vest, and of course the pension reform, and now this. So the situation is it's an important part of the debate which will happen. Our security forces are not there to do what the political authorities should be doing, and this is a debate which the government has been eluded. This government has been eluded, and I think this will be, a very important debate that the opposition is going to fuel in the next days or in the next week.
So the question remains, are the political parties going to unite and try to bring some sort of redemption to the police services in France, or are they going to use this as bargaining chips of election discourse? Just quickly, Mr. Engels and then Mr. Dupuy.
Yeah, well, we have already seen now that the representative of the France Insoumise has left the debate between Macron and the representative of the different parties, because she did not want to take part until the end in this debate on how to find a bipartisan or multi-partisan solution to that problem. Because, of course, this is their electorate. This is the electorate of the extreme left. These are the migrant group. These are the anarchists, basically, you could say. So they are, apart from lip services, not willing in any means to drop this idea that the police kills, because this has been one of the slogans of Jean-Luc Mélenchon, La police tue. So this is an extremely strongly and offensive idea. The police is killing. So we are very near to the defund the police idea of the United States. So
that's
this
right. I know it's incredibly similar. And just a final statement, Mr. Dupuy.
Yeah, well, my colleague put it very clearly. There are those who want to go forward and those who want to use the events for their political matters. I think this is a very new a cleavage which is not new, but it is going stronger as we have a weak parliament, and a brace can inflame again the instability, the political instability of the French president. And I think that La France Insoumise is playing this game. It's a very tricky game. It's a very inappropriate game.
That's right. And it's very irresponsible. I mean, at a time like this, I think people should be trying to put out the fire rather than stoking it. But hopefully we'll continue this discussion, hopefully after this unrest ends. But gentlemen, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us this evening. Thank you. That was Emmanuel Dupuy, president of the Institute for European Perspective and Security, and Professor David Engels, historian from the Institute for Western Affairs in Poznań. And thank you for joining us this evening. Please stay with us here on TVP World.